Is it working? Okay. One of the reasons we're filming this, I would stop and let you ask questions, but if you'll let me go through this real quickly, my plan is to send this to my son in Virginia so he can kind of get an idea of what it was like over there. So, anyway, again, you're welcome to some sesame seed halva, but see if this works. All right. This is the group of people I went with. There were 35 in our group. Everywhere you go was in a big, nice bus. One thing that was nice about the bus is it had internet on the bus. So when you're on the bus traveling, you can be on your iPhone or phone or so forth like that. But this was a Christian study tour, and that's what we did. We went from place to place to place, and when we got to where we were going, it was get out your Bibles. This is what happened here in this place at this time. And so that's what it was like from 8 o'clock in the morning till about 6 o'clock at night. And that's what we did. So, but this is the question that is important to answer, was for me, is does the Holy Spirit inspire, lead, guide, and correct the stupid? And the answer to that question is unequivocally yes, and here is why I know that. Tammy took me down the Sunday before we left on Monday. I spent the night with my son in Arlington. He was going to take me to the airport the next day. I got everything ready, had all my luggage, everything's ready to go. I did the things that they recommend before you go. Take copies of your passport, do all that kind of stuff, make sure all your luggage is together. Well, that morning I woke up. My son's not up. I don't have anything to do. I'm anxious to get going, so I get on my computer and read the paper, do some things like that. I stall a little bit longer, still don't have anything to do. He's still not up yet. So I thought, I'll organize my computer bag just to get it organized because I kind of threw everything in there Sunday before we left. As I'm going through there to organize everything, I noticed something missing. My passport.
Oh, no.
So what had happened is I had photocopied it, put the photocopy in my luggage, but left the passport on the photocopy machine in our condo. So now at this point, it's 8 o'clock, and I make a few phone calls, and luckily, Venice Webb is here, and she answers her phone and says, I can get it to you, meet you in Decatur. She meets us in Decatur, make it back to the airport in plenty of time, no problems. But that whole time I wasn't concerned. I thought this is all going to work out somehow. I just got to relax. And but he does correct us, and he gave opportunities to find it. I delayed for about 2 hours before I did after I woke up, but eventually, it kept hounding on me to check my bag, and I did. And there it wasn't. So this is not going to be like an pictures of me. I don't have a whole lot of pictures of the places. And the reason I don't, you can go on the internet and get hundreds of pictures, thousands of pictures. What I wanted to do is to kind of give you an idea of what came across to me that was important to me. And this is just one snippet. I could do about 50 of these things, I think. Realistically, I've got about 18 planned to do at our church. But that kind of gives you an idea. It's a lot of information. But to get started, we'll start with the Bible verse that we went to. But Israel right now today, they have a little over 34,000 archaeological sites. And they are uncovering about 2% of those. And when they do uncover them, they don't uncover the entire site because they probably couldn't build any place in Israel if they did. But what they do is they uncover enough to understand what was there, kind of get an idea of the lifestyle, those type of things, but not excavate 100% of the area for the most part. So that's what they do. We'd go to these sites and you'd see all this stuff excavated, and we could see what was going on, and they'd say, oh yeah, but this is just 1/10 of the city or 1/10 of the town, because they just want enough to give us an idea of what it was really like in the area. But to give you an idea, we went to the city of David, which I always heard the city of David, Zion, Jerusalem, all synonymous, all mean the same thing. And that's sort of true, but not 100% true. So we went to Jerusalem, and we uncovered this verse, and we talked about this, but we went to the city of David, which is in Jerusalem, which is in the old city of Jerusalem, but not today. Today it is not in the old city of Jerusalem. It's actually outside. But in biblical times, it was a part of Jerusalem. But here's what it says in 2 Samuel. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their mighty campaigns. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler." When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. Now, here's what I wasn't clear about. You know, in the Old Testament, it tells us there's the during David's time and King Saul's time, there was Israel and there was Judah, two Jewish nations that were separate of each other, and their governments were run differently from each other. And so Saul was the king of Jordan, which is the southern half, and of Judah it was the southern half, and then Israel was the northern half. Well, when King David was anointed king, he was anointed king of Hebron, of Judah. And so David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned over Israel and Judah 33 years. So because he was originally from Israel, he was anointed by Samuel from God to be the king and take Saul's place, which made him the king of Judah. He was not the king of Israel yet when he first became king. When he became king and overcame Saul and began to rule, he was not originally the king over Israel. That happened a few years later. They accepted him as his king. But David did something very important. If I can get this to change. There we go. David found a place that said this would be the perfect place to set up my rule. Instead of being in Hebron down in southern Georgia, he was very political. He says, I need to find a place that's right on the border of Israel, my home country, and Judah. And guess where that place was? Jerusalem. But at the time, it was not called Jerusalem. See, the king and his men marched to Jerusalem, which was not really Jerusalem at that time, to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, you will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off. They thought, David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. On that day, David had said, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. That is why they say the blind and lame will not enter the palace. David then took up residence in the fortress and called it the city of David. He built up the area around it from the terraces inward, and he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him. Now, this, there we go. This is what an artist's rendering of Jerusalem was like based upon the ruins that they are finding. This was not Jerusalem when David attacked it. As you read in the Bible, it was Jebus. And that's what the Hebrew says. It uses the word Jebus where we have the word Jerusalem, because this is the town that David attacked. It was right in the center. If you look the hills to the north were Israel. If you look back the other direction, Judah. So this was right in the middle. It was the perfect place to set up his headquarters, his kingdom, his palace. So, but to get it, he had to conquer it. And to do that, the Jebusites were there and had been there for centuries. They were one of the Canaanite tribes that when Joshua and the Israelites came across and conquered the land that was promised to them, there were some tribes they didn't get rid of. This was one of them. They let these people continue to live there, and because they didn't bother anybody. They had their little walled city, and they had something very important. What's very important in Israel? Water. This area right here was the Gihon Spring. And so they had built a wall around the spring and had built canals so they could actually bring the water up into the city without even having to leave the walls. So they had a nice little containment area. And so in the previous verses you saw where they literally made fun of David. And it is awe-inspiring when you stand, and you can stand right here today and look down at this area. And you can stand on some of those ruins and you look down and you can say, I can see why they said, you can't get in here. You'll never get in here. Matter of fact, we can put our blind and lame citizens on top of this wall and you still couldn't get in here. They taunted David continuously, day and night. And David's trying to figure out how I can get in here. Not only are these walls steep, but this is like a canyon. It's just a sheer drop-off. So it's just not easy to get up into. But David said, what? We can get into them by using the water shafts. Well, that really doesn't have any meaning to me until we walked through the water shafts. See, David was able to get into this area, take his men, and go through the canals that they had built to bring that water, that spring water, up into the city. And that's how they entered. They didn't think that David knew about those canals and those caverns that they had built to bring the water in. But David did know, and that's how he got in, and that's how he conquered it. So extremely interesting, and that made that verse, those verses come alive when you understand how David was taunted and how difficult it was and how those people, the Jebusites, thought, you're never ever going to get in here. So with that, we'll go here. Now, Hiram, king of Tyre, sent envoys to David, along with cedar logs and carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. Then David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. David, Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent envoys to David with cedar logs, carpenters, and stonemasons to do what? Build him a palace. Well, this verse has been in the Bible for how long? 2,500, 2,800 years? There has been big debate that this can't be true. Matter of fact, there's some people in Israel that state or believe that all this stuff of Saul, King David, all of that stuff is merely a myth, kind of like the Knights of the Round Table. You know, it didn't really happen, it's just a myth. Why? Because they never could find a palace for King David until 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they uncovered the palace of King David. They knew where the city of David was outside the walls of Jerusalem. They found the city, and that was back in the early 1900s, 1920, sometime the English had come over, were doing excavation. They found what they knew was the city of David, but where's the palace? So did David really exist? Well, make a long story short, they found David's palace, and it was underneath the visitor center for the city of David. Lady came, an archaeologist came and said, look, I need to excavate right where the visitor center is because that's where David's palace is. And they said, well, we're not moving the visitor center. Yeah, but the palace is right where underneath this. And anyway, after a lot of convincing, she convinced them to let her dig there about 3 years ago. She started digging, and 2 years ago they found specific evidence that that was a palace that is described by those verses. So, where was the palace? Right up here. Matter of fact, it says King David looked down upon his city. It says that. That's where his palace was, right here. And they found evidence of that. So how do they know it was his palace? Now, I thought this was pretty neat. So I want to show you this because the spring of Gideon, or the Gihon Springs, is extremely important. So this is what you were just looking at. And over time, you see kind of how it built up. This was probably about the time that King David lived in. He had expanded it, made the city stronger, fortified it, but this was the city of David in Jerusalem. And then, of course, King David died, and Solomon took over and did what? Built the temple. And if I can get it just about right, you can see, here's the first temple at the very top of the hill. And then here's the palace. This is where Solomon would have lived, but here is the temple that he built. And then began to incorporate all of that into Jerusalem. So now Jerusalem has expanded and gotten a little bigger, and then there's the first temple. And they found evidence of the first temple, but as it continued on, of course the first temple was destroyed at 586 BC, and then was rebuilt. And King Herod then came and fortified it, or made it even bigger and better. King Herod, about 100 years before Christ, did a whole lot of renovations, and made and fortified the entire city and made the temple area bigger and stronger. Now I want to give you an idea. This is the end of the temple, the south temple walls, which you can go and walk up to. And they've excavated down to what would have been street level at Jesus' time. And if you'd like to know what that's like, if you will go to the Southwest Bank building, there next to the mall, that 10-story building, because it's taller than this building. If you will go and stand there and look up at that building, and then imagine that building going all the way to Midwestern State University, that is that wall. And it's about 12 feet thick. And you think, and you're standing on the street level where Jesus walked, and you're looking and thinking, this was a magnificent temple. I mean, it was breathtaking. It's breathtaking now to see a wall that long. But, imagine, 2,000 years ago, that's why Jerusalem was so important to people, because of the temple wall. But so that's pretty much what it looks like today. this is all ruins, and they have homes and stuff that people live in there today, but you can still go down. This wall is all in ruins now, but you could still go and down into the actual spring. So I wanted to show you this real quickly. There's completely what it looks like today, but right there. And I may have messed that up. Let's see. There it is.
There are moments in life when you have to decide which path you take. The entrance to Hezekiah's tunnel is one of these moments. Here at our feet flows the Gihon Spring, the main source of water for the city of David. From here, the water flows through the heart of the rock to the Silk. Today, you can choose between 3 different routes to get there. The Dry Canaanite Tunnel, which was recently open to the public, a splendid scenic walkway above the ground. Or this, a 533-meter walk inside the tunnel, carved in the heart of the rock, wading through the cold water. In my opinion, this is one of the most exciting experiences in all of Jerusalem. This tunnel was created by King Hezekiah about 2,700 years ago as part of the preparations for the Assyrian siege, and to this day it still conceals many secrets. In 1880, 2 youngsters were trudging through the water when suddenly one of them felt strange carving. They brought a torch and
I don't know what happened. I do know what happened. Well, anyway, this is how they dug this. They said 500 and something meters. That's over 1,500 feet. And that's one of 3 that they did. And then all that water flows down right down here to the Spring of Siloam. So Siloam Springs. And so you can walk all of that area now. They've got it all excavated. There's part of the spring. The spring is over there to the right. And so you can actually walk through that, all of that.
What was the carving that they found?
The carving was from King Hezekiah's time, where there's 3 different pathways that you can go through that get up into the city from the Gihon Springs. One was carved by the Jebusites. The other one was carved during King David's time, when he fortified and made it easier to get to and get the water out of. And then the last one was done during the when the temple was rebuilt the second time. So during Hezekiah's lifetime, they built some more. And in all of this is not only that, but there's huge caverns, caves in here that they've dug out by hand that are, half of this building could sit inside of them. And there's 3 of them. And so that's where they would take the spring water and they would fill those areas up. And then they could take that water up into the city themselves. So if the spring did run dry, which this spring runs year round, but if there was a drought or something like that, they would have water as well. But that's what they did. That carving says this is how we dug all of this out that's under here. It's not a natural cavern. It's all dug out with rock, through the rock with a hammer and a chisel. It's all chiseled out by hand.
Did you walk through the spring?
What's that? Yes. Yeah, we walked in through one of the 3. There's 3 different ones, but you can walk through all 3 of them now. And so that's what's made something different is this palace. So then the question is, why do you know it was this palace? What did the Bible verse says? It says we brought stonemasons and our wood and we made all of these things, they uncovered this in that area. This is a capital stone. And what a capital stone is, it would have been on top. This would have been where the timbers were that would hold this up. And then the capital stone would be a stone that then would hold the rafters up that would hold the roof. And so they found one of these intact. I think they found another one, but they haven't announced it yet. But this one is in the Jerusalem Museum. But they found that on that spot, which verified that, yes, King Tyre did come and build this. And there's other sites throughout Israel where they've uncovered this type of capital stone. But this is the oldest one that they've been able to verify, this capital stone. So this is where King Tyre's the one, and David said, this is what we're going, this is going to be our symbol, this is going to be our capital stone of Israel. And so it was used there in the palace of David and then used in other places throughout Israel as well. So that's how they know it was a palace. One reason. So anyway, now if we go to this is in 1 Chronicles 11, it says this, these are the chiefs of David's mighty warriors. They together with all Israel gave his kingship strong support to extend it over the whole land as the Lord had promised. This is the list of David's mighty warriors. Jeshabeam, a Hachmonite, notice the Jewish Hebrew accent there I had. The Hachmonites was chief of the officers. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Tobiah, the Hoahite, one of the three mighty warriors. Such were the exploits of the three mighty warriors. Abishai, the brother of Joab, was chief of the three. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed, and so he became as famous as the three. He was doubly honored above the three and became their commander, even though he was not included among them. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant fighter from Kabzeel, performed great exploits. Why are these four people important? In this excavation area, in the time of David, they had scrolls, right? And so you didn't want your scrolls read by everybody as they were being delivered them. So they stamped them with a wet clay. They would take the scrolls, wrap them up, tie them up, and then they would put a piece of wet clay over it, and then they either had a ring or a stamp that they would stamp the wet clay with, and then it had your name or your symbol on it. So when it was delivered, you would know that whoever got it, if that seal was broken or had come off, whatever, if it wasn't there anymore, then somebody may have been reading your mail. So they found not one, they didn't find two, they didn't find four. They found a little area that had dozens of these things. And think of it today, it's kind of like being a stamp collector. I keep getting these seals. Could you imagine King David getting all these messages from his four commanders and saying, yeah, well, nobody read this one, but I'll pitch that seal over there in the corner of the room. And here they are. But they find several of these things, but what's important is that some of them show those four names, specifically those four names on those seals. 2 years ago, people, they're finding this stuff. So now they know they found King David's palace. So Jeshabeam, Eleazar, Abishai, Benaiah, they are the ones that are so important. So now we verified that there was a King David, that he did have a palace. So why is all of this important? Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 colored colonnades, which we went and saw. We saw those colonnades. We're not in too great a shape, but we saw them. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. and they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool after each such disturbance would be cured of whatever disease they had. One who was there had been an invalid for 30 years? When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. When I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was the Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you're well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. Now, John 9. As he went along, this is Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. Now, we stood in the waters of the pool of Siloam, but this is what, as we read these verses, this was what was revealed to us. These are all of the miracles that Jesus did that are listed in the Gospels. Okay? Quite a few of them. Jesus only performed 2 miracles in the city of Jerusalem. The rest of them were outside and in Galilee, other places, but 2. Miracle at the pool of Bethesda. Miracle healing of the blind man, and the discourses there at Jerusalem. Now, 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 10. Look at this. Remember what happened? Remember David? Remember what they were taunting him with? "Even our blind and our lame could protect this city." And they taunted him day and night until he took the city. Matter of fact, that is why they say, who says? That's what they said. The blind and the lame will not enter the palace. You see, David was so distraught over this, so angry about this, that if you were blind and if you were lame, you can't come in my palace. I'm sorry. It just brings back too many bad memories. You're not coming in my palace. What did Jesus do? Let me back up. What did Jesus do? He healed a blind man. He healed a lame man, so they could enter the temple. See, he washed away what David had established. Just another piece, just another confirmation that Jesus was who he said he was. Now, when you're standing there next to the pool of Siloam, and you realize this, and realize we've just discovered this in the last 2 years, it's hard to take a breath. It is. Now, that being said, we did take some fun pictures. And this was in the Arab section of Old Jerusalem. And it's a convenience store in the old city. And I'm not sure if the man that owns this is named Frank Incense, or if he really meant that they had frankincense inside the store. But I'm not sure that a Jew or a Christian would have that sign above his store trying to sell frank incense. But we all thought that was pretty funny. So, but there were a lot of things to do and a lot of things to see there that that do inspire you and have fun. But keep in mind that all this was brought to you by the stupid. So it wasn't just me. So that's all.
Oh, God. That was great. That's just a taste. You need to keep on.
Well, there's more.
You need to pull up some of the photos that they took.
Oh, well, you want to? You can find them quicker than I can, can't you?
Just go to her Facebook.
I mean, I didn't take pictures. I took very few pictures. I listened and